Morning, my husband stood up in front of 43 people at our closing table and slid a manila folder across to the notary. I'd already stopped breathing. Not from shock. I'd known it was coming. I'd helped him prepare the folder. But watching it happen, watching the room go from polite small talk to complete silence in the span of about 4 seconds, I understood something I hadn't been able to put into words before that moment. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs an audience. My name is Adrienne. I'm 32. I work as a compliance analyst for a regional credit union, which means I spend my days making sure financial processes are documented, traceable, and clean. The irony of that is not lost on me. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, the older of 2 kids. My brother is 3 years younger than me. He has my mother's laugh and my father's certainty that the world will adjust itself around him. He's 29, works in sales, good at it, the kind of good that comes from learning early that charm is a currency people keep accepting even after they should have stopped. My husband's name is Theo. We met at a conference 7 years ago. He was presenting a data security framework to a room of half-asleep compliance people, and he had this way of pausing mid-sentence, like he was giving the information time to settle before he moved on. I found it irritating at first. Then I found it reassuring. Now I understand it's just how he thinks. He doesn't say anything until he's sure of it. We decided to buy our first house 2 years ago, not impulsively. We made a spreadsheet. Of course we did. I work in compliance and he works in data. We tracked our savings, researched neighborhoods, talked to a mortgage advisor. We were the kind of couple that reads the fine print on everything, which makes what happened more humiliating in retrospect, because we didn't read the fine print on my own family. The down payment was going to be $52,000. Theo and I had saved about $36,000 between us over 3 years. The remaining $16,000 came from a savings account my parents had been holding for me since I was 19. When my grandmother passed, she left specific amounts for each grandchild in a letter of instruction attached to her estate. Mine was designated for a major life investment, a home, an education, whatever Adrienne decides is right for her future. My grandmother was practical like that. She didn't believe in vague generosity. My parents told me they'd opened a dedicated savings account for it when I was in college. My mother mentioned it so casually, so offhandedly, that I filed it away the way you file away something that doesn't require immediate action. The money was there, she said. It was waiting. I never asked to see the account statements because in my family, asking to see proof of something was the same as calling someone a liar, and that was not a line you crossed. We found the house in March. 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood we'd been watching for months. Good school district, even though we didn't have kids yet. Theo said you don't buy for now. You buy for the next 15 years. We put in an offer. It was accepted. The closing was scheduled for a Saturday in late April at 10 a.m. 2 weeks before closing, I called my mother to talk through the wire transfer logistics. She sounded distracted in a way I should have noticed but didn't. She said she'd look into it. She said she'd call me back. She didn't call me back for 4 days. When she finally did, it was a Tuesday night. I was cooking dinner and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't, not because the conversation went well, but because it set the clock running on everything that followed. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's already decided the answer to a question she hasn't asked yet. Light. A little careful. The way someone sounds when they're testing the ice. So I had a conversation with your father, she said, about the account. I turned the burner down. Okay. And, she said, and there was a pause I didn't know what to do with. You know your brother has been going through a hard time. My brother had been going through a hard time since approximately 2017. The specifics changed. The hard time remained constant. I waited. He had an opportunity, she said. A real one, his friend's company. They needed investors to get to the next round, and your brother believed in it, and, well, what did you do? I asked. She moved quickly past my tone. It wasn't all of it, and it was always meant to be a loan. He fully intends to pay it back, she said. You know how he is about follow-through when something matters to him. How much? I asked. She told me, $16,000. All of it. Gone. The burner was off now. I don't remember turning it off. I was standing at the kitchen counter with the phone against my ear, and the room had that strange, muffled quality, like I'd gone underwater. Adrienne, she said, it was only ever a loan to him. He has the job now. The sales numbers have been strong. He can absolutely. We close in 2 weeks, I said. I know, she said, and we'll figure it out. Your father and I can lend you part of it. We have some in the Flex account, maybe 8,000, and your brother can contribute the rest once his next commission cycle. I'm not asking my brother for my own money, I said. Silence. That came out sharper than I expected. But I didn't take it back. She softened her voice, which was always the move when I stopped being cooperative. Adrienne, we didn't think the timing would overlap like this. We thought the closing would be later. And it was sitting there doing nothing. It didn't seem. It was mine, I said. It was left to me. And then my mother said the thing that has sat in my chest like a splinter ever since. Your grandmother wanted to help the family, she said. Not just one person. I didn't answer. I said I talked to Theo, and I hung up. Theo was in his office when I walked in. He looked at my face and closed his laptop. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which he always does. When I finished, he asked only one question. Is there anything in writing? Anything from when they set up the account? I thought about it. There was an email. Years ago, my mother had forwarded me something from the bank when the account was opened. I'd never looked at it carefully. I dug it out of an archived folder after midnight that night, sitting on the bathroom floor with my phone while Theo was asleep. The account was a joint account, my name and my mother's, which meant, legally, she had equal rights to withdraw. I stared at that information for a long time. Then I went back to bed and didn't say anything until morning. Theo was already up when I came downstairs. He had coffee ready and his laptop open, and that particular stillness he gets when he's been thinking since before the sun came up. I showed him the email. He read it once, then again. Then he said, quietly, "Do you have the original bequest documentation from your grandmother's estate?" I did. Somewhere. It took us 3 days to find it, an old filing box in the back of the storage unit we'd been meaning to go through for 2 years. Brown accordion folder, slightly water damaged at one corner, my grandmother's name on a label in her own handwriting. Inside was her letter of instruction, notarized, attached to a copy of the estate accounting. My name was listed. The amount was listed. The intended purpose was listed, in her words, exactly as my mother had described it to me years ago, for Adrienne's future, her choice. Theo photographed every page. Then he started making calls, not to my family, to a financial attorney a colleague had recommended. He didn't tell me everything he was looking into, not all at once. He said he wanted to understand the landscape before he said anything that might not be accurate. That's very Theo. What he eventually told me over dinner on a Thursday about a week before closing was this: depending on how the account was structured and what the estate documentation showed, my mother's use of the funds might constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, not necessarily criminal, but not nothing either. The letter of instruction had language about designated beneficiary and specific purpose. The withdrawal, made without my knowledge for a purpose entirely unrelated to my future, was at minimum a serious violation of trust. At maximum, it was something a lawyer could argue in front of a judge. He said it calmly, the way he says everything, but his jaw was tight. I sat with it. I called my brother the next day, not at my parents' house. I asked him to meet me at a coffee shop near his apartment, one I'd never been to with my family, neutral ground with no shared history. He was late. He's always late. He came in with that easy walk he has, sunglasses on, ordered something complicated at the counter before he even sat down. "Hey," he said, like we were meeting for no reason. I didn't ease into it. I'd spent my whole life easing into things with my family, and I was 32 years old and I was done with easing. "I know about the $16,000, I said. He didn't flinch, exactly. More like recalibrated. He sat back and tilted his head and got that expression he gets when he's deciding which version of the story to use. "Mom told you," he said. "She did," he exhaled. "Look, it was always going to be paid back." "With what timeline?" I asked. He waved his hand. "My commission in May, it's going to be a strong quarter, I've already told Mom. And if it's not a strong quarter..." "Adrienne," he said, like I was being unreasonable. "We close in 11 days, I said. On a house. That requires a down payment. That requires $16,000 I don't currently have access to." He looked at me with something I can only describe as mild inconvenience. Like I was a scheduling conflict. I'll talk to Mom and Dad. They said they could cover part of it. They already told me that. So then it's handled, he said. It's not handled, I said. They can cover 8. The rest was supposed to come from my account. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. What do you want me to do, Adrienne? Pull cash out of thin air? I made an investment. That's what you do with money. You don't just let it sit. It wasn't your money to invest, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, it's a family account. That's how family works. There it was. The same logic my mother had used, dressed up slightly differently. In my family, any resource held by any member of the family was understood to be potentially accessible by any other member of the family, as long as the need was considered legitimate, and the need was always considered legitimate, and the need was always considered legitimate when it was his. I thought of my grandmother, her spotted hands, the way she used to sit with me at her kitchen table and ask me what I was working on, what I was building, what I wanted. She never asked my brother those questions, not because she didn't love him. I think she just knew he'd always have someone asking on his behalf. I looked at my brother across that table. What are you going to do if I escalate this? I asked. He blinked. What does that mean? It means what it sounds like. He set down his coffee. Adrienne, you're not serious. I looked at him without looking away. He shook his head slowly, the way people do when they want to perform disbelief. You're going to blow up this family over money. Not over money, I said. Over mine. I left first. The week between that conversation and closing was the quietest I've ever had with my parents. No calls asking how the prep was going. No forwarded links from my mother about furniture or neighborhood restaurants. Just a cold, polished distance, like they were already rehearsing their version of events. My father called once. He didn't ask how I was. He said, I hope you're thinking carefully about how you want to handle this, and I could hear the shape of a threat in it, soft at the edges but present. I said, I am. He said, your mother is very hurt. I said, I know. He said, this isn't the way family handles things. I said, I know that too. And I hung up. Theo and I talked to the attorney twice more before closing day. We didn't want to blow up the sale. We didn't want to go nuclear in a way that couldn't be undone. But we also weren't willing to let it disappear quietly into the family narrative where my brother's needs had always taken precedence over my reality. The attorney drafted a demand letter. It cited the estate documentation, the original account designation, and the withdrawal. It stated clearly that the funds were to be returned in full or the matter would proceed to a formal dispute process. It was not inflammatory, it was just facts, arranged in order with legal citations. We didn't send it before closing. Theo made that decision, and when he explained his reasoning, I understood it. If we sent it before closing, my family might do something unpredictable. Contest the process, create noise, anything to regain control of the situation. We needed the house to close first. We needed everything signed and finalized before we introduced the variable. We covered the gap. Theo had a small investment account he'd been building for years. He liquidated part of it without being asked, without making it a point of tension between us, without mentioning it more than once. I know, he said when I thanked him. We'll get it back. The morning of closing was clear and cold, that particular bright April cold that feels like an argument between winter and spring. We drove to the title company in almost total silence. I had the folder of documents on my lap. Theo had the second folder. My parents were there when we arrived. I hadn't expected that. My mother had said 2 weeks earlier that she and my father wanted to be there for the signing, for the moment, and I hadn't told her not to come because, at the time, I still believed the situation might resolve itself. My brother wasn't there. He'd sent a text that morning that said, sorry, conflict. I didn't respond. My father was in his good blazer. My mother had brought a small gift bag, tissue paper folded neatly at the top, something inside wrapped in white. She set it on the table when we came in and smiled at me with that particular smile she uses when she's decided that whatever happened is already behind us. Theo shook my father's hand. He nodded at my mother. He set the folder on the table in front of him and folded his hands on top of it. We sat down. The notary came in. The title officer started walking through the documents in that practiced, slightly tired way title officers have, and my mother made a small appreciative comment about the neighborhood, and my father nodded and everything felt almost normal. Almost. The title officer reached the section for down payment verification. She looked up, clicked through something on her screen. Theo opened the folder. He didn't make a speech. He didn't look at my parents first. He just took out the top document, the estate letter in my grandmother's own words, with her signature and the notary stamp from 12 years ago, and slid it across the table to the notary. Then he took out the account opening documentation, then the withdrawal record, then the attorney's preliminary summary, 2 pages, clean, factual, no commentary. He set them in a neat row. The title officer looked up. My mother's smile had gone somewhere. My father's jaw was tight. Theo's voice was level. Before we finalize, I want this documented. The down payment included funds from an account designated for my wife's use under her grandmother's estate. Those funds were withdrawn without her knowledge or authorization. We have a pending legal claim. This is not a challenge to the closing. We have alternative funds ready. But we want the record to reflect the situation accurately, in case of future proceedings. He looked at the notary, not at my parents. Is that something we can note? He asked. The notary looked between us. She had done this job for a long time. I could see her making rapid calculations behind her eyes. We can note it in the file, she said carefully. That's within my scope. Theo nodded. Thank you. The room was completely still. My father found his voice first. This is a real estate closing, Theo said, not unkindly. We can talk about everything else afterward. Right now we're just signing. My mother said my name, not loudly, almost a plea. I looked at her. For a moment I saw her clearly, not as the woman who had taken my money or covered for my brother or told me my grandmother would have wanted the family to benefit, but as a woman who had spent decades running a family according to a hierarchy she believed in, genuinely, and who was sitting in a title company office watching the logic of that hierarchy get laid out on a table like evidence, which is exactly what it was. I felt something for her in that moment. I did. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't softness. It was more like recognition. I saw her. Then I turned back to the notary and said, "We're ready to proceed." We signed a house. My parents left before the paperwork was fully completed. My mother picked up her gift bag on the way out. She didn't leave it. I don't know why I remember that detail, but I do. The demand letter went out that afternoon, not from anger, not as a punishment, simply because it was the next thing in the sequence Theo and I had agreed on. My attorney sent it by certified mail and email simultaneously. Factual. Referenced. No theater. My mother called 4 times that week. My father left 2 voicemails. The first one was cold. He said we'd embarrassed the family, and he hoped we understood what we'd started. The second one, 2 days later, was different. Slower. Less certain. My brother texted. Just the words. Was that really necessary? I thought about it. Then I wrote back, yes. He didn't respond. The restitution took 6 weeks to fully resolve. There were calls between attorneys. There was a period where my mother tried to renegotiate the terms into something more comfortable, something with a longer timeline and more ambiguous language. Our attorney held the original number, no adjustments. My parents wired $16,000 back into an account in my name only. No joint access, no soft language about family resources or what Grandma would have wanted. I didn't call to thank them. That might sound hard, but I didn't take the money in the first place. I was returning to a starting point, not receiving a gift. We moved into the house on a Friday in May. Theo carried the boxes. I carried the keys. We had exactly 1 piece of furniture, a second-hand table we'd been using in our apartment for 6 years. That night we ate takeout sitting on the floor of our empty living room with the windows open. It was warm. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere outside, someone was mowing a lawn, and the smell of it came through the screen, and I thought about my grandmother's backyard, the way the grass used to look in the evening light, the particular green of a summer evening in the South. She would have liked this house, I think. She would have sat at the kitchen table and asked me what I was building here, what my plans were, what I wanted from the next 15 years. I would have had answers for her. I still talk to my mother. Not as often and not the way we used to. There's a careful distance now, measured and honest. Some days, she tries to cross it. She mentions my brother's name with a brightness that's meant to signal that things are normal, that we're past it, that the family unit is intact. I don't argue with her about it. My father and I are cordial. That's the right word. We don't have the same conversations we used to. I don't think he understands what he did wrong exactly. I think he understands that he lost something, but he experiences it as something that was taken rather than something that was forfeited. I've stopped trying to explain the difference. My brother and I haven't spoken since that text exchange. I'm not carrying particular anger about it, more like clarity. He borrowed money that wasn't his, spent it on something he wanted, expected the usual machinery to smooth it over, and when it didn't, he had nothing to offer except mild resentment. There's nothing to rebuild there until he decides differently. He hasn't yet. Theo and I painted the second bedroom last fall. Soft gray, the kind that changes with the light. We're figuring out what it's going to be used for. We have time. I think about something my grandmother wrote in that letter sometimes. Not the part about the money or the home or the future. There was a line near the end after the practical instructions that I'd read quickly when I was 19 and hadn't fully understood. She wrote, "I hope by the time you read this, you've figured out the difference between people who love you and people who love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything." I was 19 when I read that. I nodded and filed it away. I'm 32 now, sitting in my own house, in a room I painted myself, with a husband who once slid a manila folder across a table in complete silence and changed the temperature of an entire room without raising his voice. I think I finally understand what she meant. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother actually understood about our family that I spent years refusing to see. She never said anything directly. She wasn't that kind of woman. She expressed things through structure, through putting something in writing, through designating a purpose, through making sure there was a notary stamp on her intentions so that no one could later claim they hadn't understood. She knew, I think, that clarity was a form of protection. She knew that in a family like ours, where love had always been distributed unevenly and everyone had agreed not to name it, the only things that would hold were the things with documentation. I didn't understand that when I was 19. I thought the account was a formality. I thought family meant that the paper didn't matter because the trust did. What I know now is that trust without accountability isn't trust. It's just hope dressed up as a relationship. The thing about what my brother did and what my parents enabled is that it didn't happen suddenly. It happened because it had always been allowed to happen in smaller ways first. Money borrowed and never returned. Plans adjusted to accommodate him. My disappointments absorbed quietly while his needs were treated as emergencies. Each individual moment seemed manageable. Taken together, they built a system. And systems don't stop running until something interrupts them. Theo interrupted it. Not with anger, not with a scene, with a folder, with paper. With the same language my grandmother had used, clear, documented, impossible to misread. When he slid those documents across the table at the title company, he wasn't punishing my family. He was just refusing to participate in the fiction anymore. And that refusal, that single quiet act of holding the record straight, did more than any argument I'd ever had with my parents in 32 years. I think about the difference between intelligence and wisdom sometimes. Intelligence is understanding how something works. Wisdom is understanding what it costs when you keep letting it work that way. I had been intelligent about my family for years. I could describe the dynamic clearly. I could see the pattern. What I didn't have was the willingness to act on what I saw, because acting meant accepting that the situation was real, that it wasn't going to change on its own, and that waiting for them to recognize the problem was the same as choosing to stay in it. That's where the courage had to come from, not from anger. Anger had been available to me for years and hadn't moved anything. It came from somewhere quieter, from standing in a storage unit at midnight going through old files, from asking my grandmother's estate documents to mean what they said, from deciding that $16,000 and the principle behind it were worth the discomfort of a room going silent. The restitution mattered. Getting the money back mattered practically, and it mattered symbolically because it established that there were consequences. But what mattered more was the decision that preceded it, the decision to stop absorbing the cost of someone else's choices and call it family loyalty. I'm not estranged from my parents. But the relationship we have now is honest in a way it wasn't before, and honesty turns out to require less energy than performance did. I'm not managing their feelings about my brother anymore. I'm not pre-softening my own needs so they land more gently. I'm just a person who bought a house and is figuring out what to do with the second bedroom. My grandmother wrote that she hoped I'd learn the difference between people who love you and people who love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything. I think she knew it would take me a while. I think she trusted I'd get there. She was right about both.